Are you ready to step into the shadows? On today's video, we explore the most chilling, spine-tingling tales from the depths of the forest, true stories and legends that will haunt your nights. If you love the thrill of the unknown and can't resist a good scare, hit that subscribe button and join us on this terrifying journey into the woods. Welcome to Paranormal or Reality, where every tree has a secret. Ending visuals. A glowing subscribe button appears, framed by flickering lanterns with a call to action. Don't get lost. Subscribe now and never miss the next story. Story 1-2013. I was 15 years old. This was my first ever experience. My grandma on my mom's side passed away. My brother, mom, and I would go visit my grandpa over the next couple years a lot more since he was alone. This probably happened 2 to 3 times. We would all be sitting in the living room. Then we would hear soft sounds of plates and cutlery moving around in the kitchen. We would all kind of look at each other, knowing it was out of the ordinary. But I think we all knew it was her. Story 2-2015. I was 17 at the time. My friends and I decided to head out of my big city to explore an abandoned building in a small town. Erected in the late 1800s, it used to be a hospital, senior home, and mental asylum at points in time. It was me, my girlfriend, her cousin, and my friend. Within minutes of walking around inside, we all stop in our tracks as we hear a loud, deep moan. There was no wind at the time. We clearly heard it right in front of us. We all left immediately out of fear. Story 3-2016. I'm 18 now. I was camping with my girlfriend, my brother, and our friend. I had a very emotional dream of some being coming to me and explaining something bad had happened, but that everything was going to be okay. The next morning we pack up. After an hour or two, I don't think anything of the dream. Just as we're getting out of the mountains into the foothills, prairies. A cop pulls us over with an unmarked car behind him. Social worker asks for my brothers and my name. He pulls us aside to explain our mom had passed away last night. Since I was the only one with a license, it was the longest 2-hour drive home of my life, that's for sure. Story 4-2017, 19 years old. My girlfriend and I, still the same one, head out for a camping trip to the mountains. We were only 20 minutes outside of town in the prairies. I see a semi coming from a mile away, and I get this urgent feeling that something wrong is going to happen, since he was still far away. I had lots of time to explain to my girlfriend about this sudden sense that came over me when we were 5 to 10 seconds from crossing paths. I notice he starts to drift into my lane. It was a single-lane highway. By the time we passed each other, he was directly in the middle of both lanes. Luckily for me, I was already prepared, so I made my way over onto the shoulder. She looked at me after in disbelief. Story 5-2019, 21 years old. I'm home alone, and at this point, I'm a full believer. I had not yet received any signs from my mom. I'm lying in my bed trying to talk with her, hoping maybe she can hear me. I ask her to knock on the wall for me. It was a more rough point in my life, so for whatever reason, I was in tears at the time. I gave up and tried to go to sleep. 30 seconds later, I hear a loud knuckle-to-wall sound in my room, clear as day. That was my sign, and I felt a lot more comfortable after that. Story 6-2024. I'm now 25 years old. My grandpa had just passed on 3 weeks earlier. My dad's over at my place visiting. We're watching some hockey when all of a sudden one of us start to whistle. Within seconds, we're both whistling random nonsense tunes. But then we hear a third whistle when no one else was in the house. My fiancée, different girl now, was out running a couple errands. We started to whistle back, and something kept whistling back loud at us, mimicking our whistles perfectly. This went on for a good 2 to 3 minutes. It was whistling just as loud as us, but in a different area of the house. My grandpa was known to be a whistler, but I never got a good nor bad sense about it. I'll leave this up to you guys to decide if it was my grandpa or something more malevolent. My dad was a complete non-believer at the time, but this really opened up his eyes. It was his first real paranormal experience. In 2016, my boyfriend, now my husband, and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter 2 other people. They might factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer her help. Usually my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said her attitude put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot to camp and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people driving by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out that it was the same car each time, and the man in the car was watching us as he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy. We wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come back, so we stayed and spent the remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those two had anything to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m., we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker was another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window, but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably would have wondered why he bothered to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We laid there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also expected to find out our gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid. 2. We only joked because we were about shitting ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel. One time, my group went on a night hike to a mountain located in central Luzon. Naturally, we took the easier trail, North Peak, since we were hiking with some newbies. At around 4 a.m., we broke camp and started our descent. Almost 1 hour in, we noticed that we kept passing the same fallen tree and the same boulder. The trail was very straightforward, and many of us have climbed the mountain before, but for some reason, all of us were going round in circles. One of the more superstitious hikers decided to make us all stand in a circle, utter a prayer, and leave an offering of food. Only then were we able to complete or descend. This was around 2015 when I went on a day hike at a Mount GB, somewhere in the southern part of Luzon area. The week prior to my hike, I was in the same area with a friend. Being that the trail is relatively straightforward, we decided not to hire a guide. Fast forward to the present. I decided to do a nighttime trip with 5 of my colleagues in tow. Since I was the one who knew the trail, I was the group leader. About an hour or so, we heard something that went psst, psst, psst as we were hiking the trail. We looked around thinking it might be one of the locals. Some parts of the trail led to small houses. Anyway, it soon stopped, so we forgot all about it. We soon reached a narrow part of the trail bordered by shallow cliffs on either side. Since I was the lead, I was very focused on the trail, and I didn't notice that my colleagues were lagging behind until one of them said, "Hey, why don't you shine your flashlight right in front of you?" I stopped walking and waited for them to catch up. When we reached the campsite, I asked my colleague why he told me to shine the flashlight right in front of myself. "Well," he whispered, "you were walking so fast I didn't think you saw the child standing right in front of you." My two friends and I were walking on our way home from the summit of a mountain, also in southern Luzon, when a kid came to us asking if he can guide us for 5 pesos only. He was dressed in a blue checkered shirt and white pants. He was very well groomed, his clothes were wrinkle-free, and his hair wasn't even messy at all. We knew the trail by heart, so we kept on declining his offer. Eventually we agreed, since we figured he would follow us anyway. When we started to walk again, he suddenly stopped following us. I called out to him, but he didn't mind me. He just stood still. I looked at my companions and they were very scared. So I said, "Okay, stay there if you want, but you won't get your 5 pesos, and left. Now I told this story to fellow mountaineers, and they told me the kid was probably a child of one of the guides. This is a very popular urban legend surrounding Mount C, also called the Devil's Mountain. The famous legend narrates the story of a couple who went on a hike in Mount C at midnight. They got lost when they accidentally took an unusual trail on their way to their campsite. They arrived in a point where the trail forked, and they turned left when they should have turned right. The left was a deadly trail, thus they never made it to the campsite. According to local folks, the couple was never found. This story is connected to the previous one, also taking place in Mount C. A group of hikers, together with a guide, went on a rarely used trail. On the way, they passed by a small village, where the elders advised them to continue the trip but leave the only girl in the group at the village. They politely declined and continued hiking. Halfway through, the guide told them that he could only go as far as the first half. Being experienced hikers, they paid the guide and continued until they came to a fork in the road. As they were debating which road to take, a couple stumbled upon them and told them to take the left side. They continued following the couple even as it got dark and started to rain. Suddenly, their flashlights turned off simultaneously, but they still tried to follow the couple. When the rain stopped and their flashlights came back on, the couple was gone and one of the group members slipped and almost fell from a ravine. I have so many of these, but I'll share my favorite. I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on hanging around campsites. Weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area. But when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted. Wandered around for about 3 hours, no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water. Sat down, had a snack, drank some water, and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it'd be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog fucking took off, like he was playing to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed creek area and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first, then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough, and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I'd found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I'd said something wrong since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave a couple of details about the dog, She quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that had led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief in a way, but I know what happened.
Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.